Moving into a new house is supposed to be a fresh start, a blank slate. That's what my wife, Erin, and I told ourselves when we packed up our tiny apartment and moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city. We had just had our first child, a little girl named Sophie, and we needed more space. The house itself was nothing extraordinary. A modest two-story home with a big backyard, a wraparound porch, and an attic we planned to use for storage. It had been empty for a couple of years, but everything seemed in good shape. At first, things were normal. We spent our days unpacking, decorating, getting used to the layout. But by the third night, I started noticing something strange. Whenever I walked into a room, I felt like I had just missed someone. You know that feeling? When you enter a space and it's just a little too warm, like someone was just there, but you know for a fact that no one was. That happened constantly. At first, I blamed it on my nerves. Moving into a new house is stressful, and I figured I was just on edge. But then I started waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m. every single night. Not because of a noise, not because of a nightmare. Just waking up, eyes snapping open in total darkness, my heart pounding. No reason, no sound, just the overwhelming feeling that someone was in the room with me. It wasn't until a week later that I found the first footprint. It was in the dust by the attic door. A single, bare footprint. Small, like a child's. I didn't tell Erin. She was already stressed, and I figured there had to be an explanation. Maybe I had tracked something in. Maybe it was from a contractor before we moved in. But then, the door opened on its own. I was home alone, carrying a box upstairs, when I heard it. A soft click. I turned, and there it was. The attic door, swinging open. Slowly, I stood frozen, watching as it creaked wider and wider, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. I forced myself to step forward, reaching for the pull cord that dangled just inside. My fingers brushed against something that pulled away. I yanked my hand back and slammed the door shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. That night, I told Erin everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't brush it off. She just stared at me and whispered, "I've been hearing footsteps upstairs." We decided to set up a baby monitor, not just in Sophie's room, but in the attic. At 3:13 a.m., the monitor picked up a voice. A soft, whispering voice. It wasn't clear. It wasn't in English, but it was there. I grabbed a hammer the next morning and went to check the attic. There was nothing. No furniture. No storage boxes. Just dust, and something written on the far wall. Small, scratchy letters carved into the wood, as if by fingernails. "I see you." We moved out the next day. Buying a house was supposed to be the best decision of my life. After years of scraping by in tiny apartments, I finally had the chance to settle down, to build something permanent. When I found a spacious old home at an unbelievably low price, I jumped at the opportunity. It was an old Victorian-style house, slightly run down but charming in a way that felt almost magical. Tall ceilings, antique fixtures, a grand staircase in the foyer. Sure, it needed some updates, but I was willing to put in the work. The real estate agent told me the house had been vacant for years, but she didn't say why. I assumed it had been caught in legal limbo, or maybe it had just been forgotten. Looking back, I should have asked more questions. The first few nights were uneventful. The house creaked and groaned, but that was normal for something so old. I chalked it up to settling wood and temperature shifts. But by the end of the first week, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. At night, I would hear soft knocking from inside the walls. Not the pipes, not rodents. Knocking. At first, I ignored it. But as the nights passed, it became more distinct, more intentional. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a voice. Not a full sentence, just one word. Help. It was muffled, like it was coming from inside the house itself. The next day, I searched everywhere. The basement, the closets, the attic. Nothing. But when I knocked against the wall in the hallway, I heard something knock back. I stared at the wall, heart pounding. It was hollow. I grabbed a flashlight and examined the floor plan the realtor had given me. And that's when I noticed it. A room that wasn't marked. A space that should have been there, but wasn't. I ran my fingers along the wallpaper until I found the seam. The edges were almost invisible, but now that I knew where to look, I could feel them. With a deep breath, I pushed. The wall gave way like a door. Behind it, a hidden room. The air inside was stale, freezing cold. The room was small, barely big enough to stand in. The walls were covered in scratches. Tiny, desperate scratches. I swallowed hard and stepped inside. A single mattress lay on the floor. Next to it, a rusted tin plate and a doll with no eyes. My breath caught in my throat. Then I saw the writing, scrawled all over the walls, in faded, jagged letters. "Let me out." I stumbled back, my hands shaking. Who had been in here? How long? That night, I slept in my car. I called the police the next morning, and they came to investigate. They told me what I already knew. The house had been abandoned for decades. The hidden room wasn't on any official records. Probably an old servant's quarters, one of the officers said. Back in the day, people sealed off rooms like this. Out of sight, out of mind. But I hesitated. That doesn't explain the knocking. The officer gave me a strange look. "You said the knocking came from inside the wall?" I nodded. His face darkened. "There's no space back there. We checked. That room is sealed on all sides." I didn't stay long enough to ask more questions. I sold the house as fast as I could. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the knocking. I moved into my new house 3 months ago. It wasn't anything spectacular, a simple one-story home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved at each other but didn't pry. After years of renting, I was thrilled to finally have something of my own. The house had been on the market for a while, which surprised me because it was in great shape. The realtor told me the previous owner had moved away suddenly, left town without much warning. "Got a job overseas," she said. I didn't think much of it at the time. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I repainted the walls, bought furniture, settled in. Then small things started happening. The first was the front door. I always locked it before going to bed. Always. But I'd wake up in the morning and find it unlocked. Wide open sometimes. I thought I was just being forgetful, but after the third time, I started double-checking, triple-checking. I'd lock the door, test the knob, even take a picture on my phone just to reassure myself. And yet, every morning, it was open again. The second thing was the footsteps. Soft, barely audible, but definitely there. Late at night, I'd hear them in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I lived alone, so I told myself it was the house settling, the pipes, the wind outside. But the noises weren't random. They were following me. If I was in the living room, I'd hear them in the kitchen. If I was in the kitchen, I'd hear them in the hallway. Always close by, never too far. I stopped sleeping well. Every creak, every shift of the house sent me into a spiral of paranoia. Then I found the note. It was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came home from work. A handwritten note on an old piece of lined paper. "Why are you in my house?" I froze. My stomach twisted into knots. I didn't write that. No one else had been in the house. No one should have been in the house. I checked every door, every window. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. But someone had been inside. That night, I barely slept. I locked every door, wedged a chair under the handle of my bedroom door, and kept my phone gripped in my hand. I told myself I'd call the police in the morning. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard it. The whisper, just outside my bedroom door. Not words, just breathing. Long, slow, shallow. Then, a tap. Light. Against the wood. A single, deliberate tap. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. It didn't. Minutes passed. An eternity. Then, slowly, the sound faded. When the sun finally rose, I grabbed my things and left the house. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I booked a hotel and called the police. They searched the house, top to bottom. Found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No hidden crawl spaces. But then the officer checking the basement called me over. "Sir, you should see this." I followed him downstairs, my hands sweating. The basement was mostly empty. Just storage boxes, an old workbench, bare concrete floors. But the wall behind the staircase was different. The officer knocked, and the sound was hollow. A hidden space. They pried the boards away. And inside? A mattress. A pile of old clothes. Empty food containers. Someone had been living there. For how long? No one knew. The police assumed it was a squatter. Some homeless person who had found a way inside. Maybe through an old vent or a broken window before I moved in. But that didn't explain the whispering, or the note, or the fact that, in the dust on the floor of the hidden room, there were footprints, leading out. I never went back. I don't know where he is now, and I don't want to know.